sales system engineer with RightStar. And I've got about a couple decades experience or so in the IT consulting and solution implementation spaces. And the last 10 or 15 of that in the ITSM and ITIL space. And I've been ITIL Foundation certified for years, and more recently I've also become DevOps Foundation certified as well. So hopefully our topics are right in my sweet spot today. So let's dig in and get going. So let's talk about this. What do all high-performing IT organizations have in common? So based on a recent Puppet Labs State of DevOps report, which was based on responses from 20,000 technical professionals, they really have three things in common. First of all, high-performing IT organizations are more agile. Those teams are innovating faster and faster than ever, and deploying 30 times more frequently, with up to even 200 times shorter lead times. Secondly, they're more reliable. By streaming their process and streamlining their process and fortifying infrastructure, and those high-performing teams have been able to show 60 times fewer failures and even recover 168 times faster. And third, they're just winning. Teams that practice DevOps typically exceed not only profitability but market share and productivity goals. So let's talk about today's situation. We know that we live in an interconnected and really rapidly changing world, especially technology-wise. And today's businesses have multiple tools for productivity and communication and work, and of course there's new ones popping up every day. And the business wants to drive innovation and new technologies and frequent updates to be able to support competitiveness in the market and rapidly changing business requirements. But at the same time, they also want all these services they're offering to be reliable and stable. And of course, as we all know, change is often the nemesis of stability, because inevitably, the more you change something, the more likely it is you're going to break it. And in fact, according to Gartner, 80% of all incidents are actually caused by changes. But then who's expected to deliver those more reliable services? Well, that same development team that's responsible for all those changes. So over the last couple decades, we've come up with some agile and lean methodologies that have changed the way we develop software. And ever since, the developers have been tasked with delivering those features faster and more frequently, while the IT operations and support side of the house need to maintain infrastructure stability and availability. But the customers want both. And really, that's where the conflict comes in. So to achieve resolving that conflict, we need to change the way that we handle change. IT organizations are tasked with balancing business expectations while keeping everything running, like we talked about. And within that IT organization, specific IT teams face several kinds of challenges of their own. There's a continuing pressure to improve relevance of services to the business. IT has to really balance the rate of change with that stability to ensure that they're actually providing business value. We find that scattered data, or maybe lack of information at all, at many levels even, limits incident and problem understanding. We find that deployment failures have a really high risk of downtime. And of course, all too often, there's a lack of communication, and so changes are made that IT support doesn't even know happened. And similarly, we run into duplication of work and redundancies and gaps in knowledge and handoff that all result in higher IT and business costs from that perspective. And the feedback from support that often represents the customer's interest and probably really well, because they deal with them on a regular basis, day in and day out. But that information doesn't always get communicated back to and from development and product owners and product managers. So ultimately, what we find is that communication and collaboration is really the key to that business success. IT teams are responsible for customer interactions, and their success depends on the stability and quality of those services. Now, it's often the case that development and support teams have different goals and different methodologies and work in probably even different systems. And over time, they end up becoming siloed because of the lack of collaboration, which creates all kinds of problems through miscommunication and a lack of shared knowledge. So how do we begin to break down those silos and to really strive to improve communication and collaboration and to drive higher business value? Well, we got to get those IT teams, those IT support teams, and those development teams to work together. And with all the other IT functions, not only development, but operations and QA and support and testing, really everybody. So this DevOps movement was really a response by those development groups to this conflict. And what DevOps does, it aims to bring these two teams together in a way that they can really work successfully together. So IT support needs to understand and adopt these sort of agile and lean and Kanban principles that the dev folks have been working with for a while now in order to continue to support both IT and the business services. So I've mentioned DevOps a couple times. What is DevOps? Well, let's dig in and find out. So DevOps advocates for a collaborative working relationship between development and IT operations, where historically they've probably been separate. Now, development in this use here refers to teams that develop and maintain software products and services. So today I'll focus on things like internal developers maintaining systems and other tools that employees use to help them be productive, like centralized purchasing systems and CRMs and things like that. Now, operations refers to teams that deliver, manage, and support those products and services. So while dev is focused on developing and maintaining, operations is focused on delivering, managing, supporting. And from that perspective today, again, we'll focus sort of internally on IT teams that are supporting internal systems that employees use. So as examples, like companies like Netflix and Amazon and Google today are starting to, or have been following these DevOps principles, applying them to practices and principles to be able to release faster and maintain really high quality of services. As a matter of fact, Netflix does about 100 releases per day under that, which I just think is astounding. So let's move into some of these principles. So let's talk about DevOps principles. So Patrick Dubois, the creator of the term DevOps, mentioned in his blog that DevOps is not a technology. It's a business problem, not a technology. And that the best way to understand DevOps is really distilling it into these three principles that were popularized by Gene Kim in his book, The Phoenix Project. We have the first way, which is around systems thinking, the second way, which is around feedback loops, and the third way, which is around continual experimentation and learning. So that first way around systems thinking, when you cultivate a collaborative culture between development and support teams like that, you end up shortening the feedback loop that's necessary to drive that sort of agility in the business. And the functions of that collaborative culture can really be explained by following these widely accepted principles that have been put forth in the three ways. So a quote from Gene Kim here about the first way. The first way emphasizes the performance of the entire system, as opposed to the performance of a specific silo of work or department. And so DevOps transcends departments and showcases the overall value to the customer. And really, that's what that first way is about. Development teams build and then ship to operations, which fortifies the customer value. And the first way is all about shifting our thinking to that entire system view from the customer's perspective versus the singular goals of one team involved in that, or one particular department involved in that. So some examples of system thinking, some good systems thinking. Maybe being sure to never pass down a known defect downstream. That's an example of being sure that we're doing this. Maybe never allowing any sort of changes to cause local optimization to actually create a global degradation. So looking beyond your little silo, or just always seeking to increase the flow. Now that's the first way. The second way is around feedback loops. So again, a quote here from Gene Kim from the book. The goal of almost any process improvement initiative is to shorten and amplify feedback loops so that the necessary corrections can be continually made. So ultimately, by improving feedback between development and operations and support and the customers, all those teams understand their impact to the overall goal better. And then we find that that clarity and collaboration between the teams ends up breaking down barriers and improving productivity and reducing conflict. So when teams work together from that same feedback loop, those sorts of communications breakdowns just really become a thing of the past. And then the third way. So the third way is around experimentation and learning continually. Again, my final quote here from Gene Kim around creating a culture that fosters two things. Those two things: continual experimentation that requires taking risks and learning from successes and failures, and understanding that the repetition and the practice is what is the prerequisite to the mastery. So it doesn't just come. That the idea is, practice makes perfect. So, so how would we start to apply these principles to IT support? How do we map up those IT principles to our IT support processes? Well, there's a framework, luckily, which has been called CALMS, which was coined back in 2010. And it includes a focus on culture and automation and lean and measurement and sharing. So let's look at how to apply this model to IT support. So culture. Culture is about just the everyday, weekly rituals that influence how a team works. We want to shift from silos to constant communication in that. So DevOps is about that agility and speed. And so some of the rituals you can apply to your team to improve this are things like daily stand-ups, so that once a day everybody gets on the same page, or hack days where we get together and focus, or chat rooms where folks from different places in the organization can all communicate together, or the Scrum practices around development, around sprint planning and retrospectives and those kinds of things, or the Kanban framework. Or even just chat IM solutions that can be encouraged, that can be used to encourage that kind of collaboration. And then we want to focus on results, not just the activities. So we don't want to get wrapped up in the little things we're doing. We want to make sure that they're helping. So we don't want to obsess on the number of changes we make, but rather to focus on the result of those. And so we want to measure everything and determine whatever improvement we have made based on those measurements. And we need to understand behaviors, because the culture is really just a result of bad habits. Ultimately, you have to understand how your teams work together so that you know what you can improve on. So it really takes that sort of analysis of how we're doing things today to see how we might want to move that and change it for the future. So the A in CALMS is for automation. And now, automation really only works when it supports people and processes that are already in place. So you really can't automate something you can't do manually. So we need to make sure we've got a good, solid process in place. And then automation is very helpful to help us go from trapped knowledge to shared knowledge. So that, for example, known errors need to be tracked at the time of deployment and then communicated to the support folks so they know right up front. The support folks need to be linking knowledge base articles and back to incidents and problems so that everybody understands what's causing those issues and we can get a full picture of that. And a shift from orphan tickets to link tickets. All teams, no matter who they are, should be responsible for ticket linking and documentation. That's the service desk, admins, developers, operations. Everybody needs to know what's going on. And to be sure to link those incidents and problems to the change requests and releases that resolve them, so that we have that traceability. And of course, don't just deploy, but support. This involves continuous integration and continuous delivery and continuous deployment, which are all core to the first way of DevOps that we're thinking about the performance of the overall system. And then your team needs to be prepared to support and operate and ensure the ability of those and restore those services if necessary. So they need to know what's being deployed and when, and so that they can give the right answers to the customer at the right time. The ITIL forward schedule of changes construct is one thing that might be able to be applied here. And of course, help with testing. So automated testing is a key to the DevOps environment, to a solid DevOps environment. And on top of that, IT teams hold data about various customer environments that they should really be funneling back to testing. Ultimately, support is on the front line, and so they have this really good firsthand knowledge about exactly what's going on with the customer and in their environments, and that just doesn't always get communicated. And keeping up with monitoring data. So support needs to know about any proactive monitoring, and really they should be involved in providing the requirements for that up front, so that the events are linked back to incidents and problems and changes. So our L in comms is stands for lean. So the lean approach actually came out of the automotive industry, and it focuses on things like eliminating waste, to make sure that your process is as simple as possible. So what are you doing today that's not adding value? So focus on eliminating duplicate work and getting rid of any unnecessary administration and those kinds of things. And then focusing on continually always improving. Continuous improvement in IT support is really about constantly iterating on your processes and services to deliver higher value services to the business. And one thing that's important to note is that failure is normal. One principle of that third way of DevOps is really understanding that if you're not failing, then you're probably not getting stuff done. What was learned really needs to be the most important thing that your team focuses on. And creating rituals around that, like post-incident reports or post-mortem reports, or to share lessons that you've learned and share them across your teams. So sort of like sprint retrospectives work in the agile software development practice. Now, our M in comms stands for metrics. Now, the important part here is to really track only the metrics that matter. So we want to measure things like mean time to repair, MTTR, and whether that's increasing or decreasing over time. And we want to measure repetitive incidents and how often they're occurring within a period. We want to measure service level targets against service level agreements and operational agreements, and in the context of deployments. And what's the impact of those deployments on achieving your goals? And then around costs. So what is the cost per incident, and what's the total cost of support? You really have to take this into context with downtime costs, and you find that in some cases, really increasing support costs might actually be the best thing to do to minimize the impact of these changes to the business. And finally, the S in comms is for sharing. So when it comes to sharing, you want to focus on these things, views. So does the organization understand what we're doing as a whole? Does the organization understand? And do we share that understanding with them? And do all teams understand the other team's goals and their hardships and their priorities and those kinds of things? Do the process outputs of your team flow with other teams' processes? Around the knowledge that your team knows, is it shared with others? And if we do store it in a system, is that accessible to other people? And communication. So how is your team collaborating? And are there really unbarred channels for communicating between teams, or is management kind of standing in the way there? And are the right stakeholders being kept in the loop of all your projects, even if they're not in the immediate group that is involved in that project? And ownership. So do your IT groups like development and operations and testing and support and even the business really share ownership not only of the successes but also of the failures and again of that most important part, the learning, and around tool sets. So do your teams share tool sets and information, or are they siloed? Do those tools integrate with each other if they're using different tools? So how do we define success? Well, I think success is effective processes, not just efficient processes. It's probably worth repeating that. Success is effective processes, not just efficient ones. Um, so we need to be focusing on innovation so that vision and goals are tied to business outcomes, and we need to be sharing so that categorizations and tools that enable collaboration and those kinds of things. We need to be able to ensure that those tools work together, and getting development and IT support on the same platform is often a great way to do that. Um, from a process perspective, we need to realize that incidents and problems and changes are really just part of an IT backlog, not unlike a software development backlog. Because ultimately, because the ticket exists doesn't mean that it gets addressed. We get to decide whether we fix things or not fix things based on the organization's need and the best benefit to the customer and the business. And around improvement, we need to continually improve not only service design and transition, but also operations. So, what are the critical success factors here for applying these DevOps principles to IT support? Common goals are important, first of all. It's really significant that all teams understand the other team's goals and that we all agree to the same set of goals. And a sense of urgency. Everybody needs to agree to the same timelines and objectives, and everybody needs to participate in setting them. And that cultural change we talked about, we all need to be using a common vocabulary and doing things in the same way instead of clashing with our processes. And around learning, we need to be applying that learning to people and processes and automation. And metrics, we need to ensure that goals are set based on outcomes, but then we need to measure against those goals to be sure that we got there. And what kind of metrics do we need to do that? And reinforcing behaviors. We want to reward and recognize teams as a way of reinforcing those good behaviors. And gamification is one of the things that a lot of the tools are offering these days. It's a great way to do that, to sort of put a little game behind the interaction with your team. So, like Dick mentioned earlier, RightStar is an Atlassian Gold partner, the solution vendor who provides a DevOps-focused platform that joins both application lifecycle management and IT service management together with products like Jira Software and Jira Service Desk and Confluence and Bitbucket and Bamboo. So I wanted to share a couple success stories with those Atlassian solutions and how a couple of companies were able to use Atlassian to succeed. Now, both of these companies brought their development and support teams together using the Jira platform. So the first one I wanted to mention here is Puppet Labs, which has shown improvement by resolving their tickets 67% faster. Now, Puppet Labs was a small tech startup which turned into a venture-backed company with about 300 employees or so. And when that growth occurred, they found themselves at a real crossroads. They needed to be able to scale up their support channels, but needed to maintain service levels. And as a builder of IT automation software, but both on-premise and in the cloud, Puppet Labs decided to look to Jira Service Desk for help there. Their Puppet Labs IT manager, Nick Cunningham, noted that since deploying Jira Service Desk, they've had their resolved tickets increase by almost 67%, which is a sign that their help desk team is actually able to get more work done. So today, all 300 employees at Puppet Labs are supported by Jira Service Desk. Mr. Cunningham also noted that with Jira Service Desk and the entire Atlassian stack, they've been able to increase user adoption by staying in the same system, and streamline those maintenance processes, and ended up reducing their overall cost and labor for maintaining all those multiple systems by sort of consolidating down to one that way. So with those Atlassian products, they were able to streamline workflows and add critical efficiencies, and really just provide the help that their customers need a whole lot more quickly. As a second example, I wanted to talk about Skyscanner. So millions of people are using Skyscanner's global search engine every day, and of course, it's no surprise that with thousands of those searches happening on their search engine every second, they need to take defects, really seriously, defects in their software really seriously. So to streamline those defect reports as they came in, they needed to look for a new kind of service desk. Michael Hall, Skyscanner's business tools lead, said that they are building better software now by fixing bugs twice as fast since they implemented Jira Service Desk. Today, their 700 employees in 9 different global offices are helping improve their global search engine with using Jira Service Desk. And Mr. Hall noted that their end user customers actually get email updates now from the system, so that they know when problems are fixed and they can understand their impact and to the overall product improvement. So again, here with Atlassian, Skyscanner can now focus on individuals and interactions and no longer be limited by those tools. So in conclusion, the faster, better service is about culture and sharing and tools that enable your teams. And a collaborative culture is critical to that success in DevOps. Aligning support and development can really help your organization understand what services the business wants and needs to be productive. So what should your takeaway be from today? Well, first, use the DevOps principles for IT support processes. And you could start that today by beginning to apply those 3 ways of DevOps and calms to your own IT support model. And secondly, emphasize teamwork and collaboration in order to get those dev and ops teams under the same roof by focusing on culture around emphasizing collaboration through training and incentives like simulation training and the gamification stuff I mentioned. Metrics around measuring everything, and maybe even consider starting with some benchmark studies and consolidation. So by moving disparate dev and ops support systems together, for example. So let's take a look at some questions that may have come in through our demo and presentation here today, or our presentation rather. Dick, what do we got there?
Well, now would be a good time to ask a question or two. So you might notice that there's a Q&A box, so feel free to go ahead and type in a question. But while we're waiting, I want to talk a little bit about further extend what you were saying in terms of next steps. So, what really is the so what? And you can improve and you can learn about DevOps. What's a good way to do that? Now, Alan, I know you took a certification class. You mentioned it was a DevOps Foundation. Is that? Do you know anything about that? What was that? How long was that? What kind of a class was that?
That was a 3-day course that I did 3.5 years ago or so. That was a great introduction. I personally was not super familiar with them. I had heard the industry terms and right. Sort of the on-the-ground use of them, but having them really clarified and put in context of where they came from and what they really mean instead of just sort of the hearsay, I found really helpful to get an overall view.
Well, there's a lot of other different choices that are out there. I think some of you may have been familiar with IDLE from many years ago, and I think I heard a number as high as 3 million people have IDLE certifications now. Now, DevOps is trying to do the same thing, and there's different standards bodies. There's one called DASA, which stands for DevOps, I think it's Agile Skills Association, and they have a series of courses and certifications that you can take, and I think that's an excellent way. Just about everybody, I think, has heard of Scrum Master, right? We were working on a government contract, and the government came in and said, "Hey, we're getting all our PMs trained as Scrum Masters. Do you want to sit in?" And so we said, "Sure. We'll take some of that training as well." So I know that our project managers are Scrum Masters now, as well, right? There's all kinds of just agile training. There's, RightStar, for example, offers agile coaching. Alan, you mentioned gamification is a way to learn. We offer DevOps simulation training. I think that's a good way to, in a fun way, because sometimes you really want to go to another class where you sit through a bunch of PowerPoints. I don't know about you, but I want to learn some other way. And one thing that is kind of fun is there's a class, and it's just a couple of hours really, and you role play, and you have different roles. You might have an IT director, you might have the DevOps director or VP of development there. You might be a developer, you might be a tester, you might be a change manager, you might be a business analyst. So there's just a number of roles that you can play, and the whole objective here is to try to make money as a company with all kinds of things that are swirling around at the same time. Maybe there's an outage of some sort, and so it makes learning DevOps and understanding the value of trying to integrate some of these and try to bust down some of the silos. It makes learning really fun. So I think that's something that you can take a look at as well. And then finally, when I talked at the beginning, we talked about we were doing an idle assessment, and then I mentioned that really the on the DevOps side is where they really needed help. And we also offer DevOps assessments, and they're just a very quick way to come in and get kind of a score as to how you're doing from a DevOps perspective. What could you be doing better? What's a good roadmap moving forward? What's important to you in your organization? Is cost something? Is it speed? And we'll give you a grade with recommendations for some quick wins moving forward. And we just did this at a very large company, and we came back and we did a presentation, and we grade. We're pretty strict, and we gave them a C plus. And one of the directors there said, C plus, what are you talking about? I haven't had a C since I was in elementary school. So, those are the sorts of things that we can help you with, because the whole objective here is really to get a whole bunch better then. I also wanted to just throw something else out that I think is kind of interesting. And, DevOps is all about taking small bites, quick wins, rather than one huge, big go live. And as an example, we're working now with an existing customer. They have a huge legacy system that needs to be upgraded. Very, very common in most organizations, especially the bigger ones. You got to get these upgraded, or maybe you want to move it to the cloud. And there's lots and lots of customizations, many different moving parts, lots of different business groups that have been involved in this thing. Maybe it's 5-10 years old. It needs to be upgrade. This whole thing about digitalization is really important. And so two ways to go about it. One, you could just say, okay, well, go for some small wins like the DevOps approach and take some quick bites and do a iterative type of approach and get something out. Maybe it's a service desk piece of software. You can get that up and running, and then maybe there's an HR section, and you can do that at a later time. What you may want to try to avoid is this huge go live, where you've come in, you've worked for months and months, you've gotten all the pieces put together, you've done your testing, and then you say, okay, let's go live with everything. Well, sometimes that doesn't work too well. Many of us have kind of sat through that, where there's a number of things that we didn't catch in testing, or requirements after an extended period of time. Maybe your requirements have changed a little bit, and what you thought was kind of a good thing 6 months ago might not be the best thing to do now. And so I think that DevOps is all about, smaller bites, and there's always going to be some pushback. Nobody likes change. People may say, well, we don't want to do any swivel chairing. We want to make sure that we only have one app, and we don't, we'd like to turn the old app off. We don't want to keep that up and running. So there's just a number of different things that you can think about then. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out. One question that just came in is, it must be from an Atlassian user, and I guess the question here is what's new with Atlassian? And Alan, I know you work with Atlassian every day. I know there's some things with some Slack integrations, that sort of thing. Is there anything you can think of that's new? Alan, are you there?
Sorry about that, Dick.
Yeah.
I was making some noise and put myself on mute and didn't catch it. The Slack partnership that was just announced is probably one of the big ones. the partnership to move forward with that, as well as just last week, I believe, Atlassian announced a new entry into the space called Jira Ops that would be intended for an entire mobilization team response to a large sort of corporate-wide outage. Bringing your services down, that kind of large outage. To be able to coordinate in one point together and to be linked with Opsgenie, for example, one of the a tool that can intake monitoring alerts and correlate those and create events from them or create issues from them. So that kind of stuff's going to be available. And Atlassian has actually just announced that they've purchased Opsgenie, or they're going to.
Well, I think that's exciting. One thing that Atlassian is they're somewhat of a disruptor, and they're more of a disruptor because they have good software, but also because they're inexpensive. They build very good software at inexpensive prices, so it certainly allows customers to redirect some of that money into other parts of their organization. And I like that because now they're getting into the alert management space, which is very, very important. Most organizations, especially the large organizations, have some alert management software, and some of that is more expensive than others. So I'm sure that it's going to be very reasonably priced, and it will allow others that may not have been able to afford a decent alert management system to actually have one. So I like that as well. And finally, the last question that we have here is again related to Atlassian, and it says, we want to use tools like sprints and epics and Kanban. How does Jira allow that to happen in the tool set? We talked about in general some of the Atlassian tools today. One specific one is the Jira software entry. The Jira entry. Jira is the workflow item management tool, or work item management tool. The flavor of Jira that is used by software development teams, called Jira Software, actually offers two different approaches to that. So as you create a new project in the tool, you can determine whether that project is going to be an agile project or a Scrum project. A Kanban project or a Scrum project. So if you go that Scrum style project, the project by default automatically has sprints and a list of current sprints and sprints that you can load up in the future, and a way to story point things, and those sort of burn down reports and everything involved in that Scrum approach of trying to limit your work into time-based iterations and force yourself to get things out the door. If you create that Jira project as a Kanban project, you get a different kind of approach that allows you a large backlog that you can move things in and work through it and pull work through a Kanban board. And the way that work is limited in that way is by how many tasks can be in any given state at a time in a column. Typically, it's done in a to-do and in progress and done columns. So maybe you're only allowed to have 5 things in progress because we just physically can't handle more than that at once. So maybe that's how we limit our throughput. But both kind of styles are represented there, as well as there's ways to just do the old sort of waterfall approach there with the Atlassian suite as well. Okay, well that is pretty much a wrap. I don't have any other questions. Alan, thanks for just a terrific job today running through this material. As you can see up on the board here, there's a number of ways that you can contact RightStar, either through the web or through phone or through email, and we certainly want to hear from you and hear from you just about anything. If it's an Atlassian question, or how can I take better advantage of this tool set that we have, or maybe if you wanted to look at an assessment of some sort, or maybe if you wanted to take some training classes or figure out how to improve with what you already have, get your money's worth out of the tools and the processes that you're working with, then certainly give us a call or contact us, and we'd love to talk to you about that. So I want to thank everybody that's out there for spending some time with us today. We hope that you'll tune in next time, and we do these all the time. I think we're having another webinar next week, and the topic is on AI and chatbots. Did I say that right? Chatbots. One in particular, we've done some work at a significant university that's now powered by this IBM Watson, a chatbot, which is really kind of fun. So if you wanted to learn more about that, stay tuned.